Okay, buckle up because this one reads like a soap episode that accidentally leaked into real life and then into everyone's For You page. It started like so many TikTok lives do. Someone hits the Go Live button with the intention of answering a handful of questions, maybe smoothing over a rumor or two. Maybe looking earnest for 5 minutes while the chat drops hearts and the algorithm smiles. But what happened when Drew Jenkins clicked live was anything but a tidy truth-telling session. Within minutes, the stream stopped being a controlled lie or truth exercise and turned into a slow-motion unspooling of everything wrong in their little online universe. If you were there, you watched the veneer peel away in real time. If you missed it, imagine a room full of people watching a ship hit the rocks and then arguing about why the captain didn't see the map. That was the energy. Fascinated, horrified, unable to look away. He began calmly, the kind of calm that reads as practiced on camera. A half-nervous smile, shoulders trying to convince the viewer that everything is fine, eyes hunting for the right tone. The chat popped off immediately, not with small talk, but with the heavy, direct questions people saved for the moment someone claimed they were finally going to be real. And the first question was a banger. How much are you paying for that motel room? You could feel the nails on chalkboard in a single line of inquiry. Stephanie, in previous content, had been the one to brag, or perhaps misremember, that they were paying $700 a week for the one-room motel they called home. For the audience doing the math on the fly, that landed at $2,800 a month for a single motel room with kids. That number is the kind you don't shrug at. It makes people stop scrolling and pull out their phone calculators like vigilantes. Drew's answer was the moment everyone leaned in. He simply said, yes. No pause that suggested elaboration, no correction, no, well, actually, nothing. A flat, matter-of-fact yes. The chat collectively inhaled. Because on paper, this makes no sense. Rent that high buys actual living space. If you're smart, you can find extended stay options, small one-bedroom listings, even month-to-month Airbnbs that aren't going to swallow a family's budget. People in the comments began offering concrete alternatives, links, neighborhood suggestions, price comparisons, doing the kind of crowdsourced problem-solving that the internet loves to do. That should have been the moment where the couple says, "Okay, we're looking into options. Thanks, everyone." Instead, the live turned into something more unsettling. A portrait of two people telling two different stories at once. And that's where the pattern started to emerge. Drew would answer a question, and somewhere behind the frame, Stephanie would be an audible presence, quick to correct or to steer. He was hesitant, glancing over his shoulder like someone checking whether the puppeteer had nodded. The vibe wasn't defiance or confidence. It was someone standing in front of a script, hoping not to improvise. You could see him register that perhaps he should say something else, but then he didn't. The audience noticed. They kept pushing. Why not an Airbnb? Why not an extended stay? Drew's candid admission that he didn't even know what Airbnbs cost landed like a punch. For a lot of people, that felt less like ignorance and more like a tacit surrender to whatever narrative Stephanie had already published. And then she cut in, the sound of her worry trying to become the sound of authority. She claimed she'd researched places and that the cheapest she found was huge amounts for a month. But the way she rattled off figures and then backed down with, "Maybe I was looking in the wrong spot," read more like scrambling than fact-checking. The room of strangers watching started to smell something off, and the suspicion only fed itself. What cemented the discomfort for many was the way Stephanie moved in the stream, not present as a partner, but as a stage manager. There was a moment that could have been soft, Drew lifting their daughter up, that tiny human face inching closer to the camera, and instead, it was clipped by a grab. Stephanie came forward sharp, snatched the child from Drew like she was reclaiming a moment she didn't trust. There was no softness, no, "Hey, thanks," just a quick, possessive extraction. The chat paused. People wanted to believe she was protecting the child, but there was an edge that smelled of control more than care. Drew didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply watched, which sent a different message entirely, that he was a bystander in his own family pictures. Then someone in the chat dropped a question that shifted the entire tenor of the conversation. Are you worried about CPS? The question sat there like a dropped plate. Drew's shrug and nonchalant no felt like the scariest part. He added casually that CPS had been around the motel recently, as if that were a normal thing to mention between sips of coffee. The collective horror in the comments was instant. The question stopped being tabloid and started being about safety. People begged for clarity. Were the kids okay? Had there been investigations? The live, which began as entertainment, had become a slow-motion intervention performed on a public stage. The chat was no longer only about gossip. It was about whether a family was being cared for properly. The kids then became the emotional pivot of the stream. Atlas, the little boy, had to be fetched off-screen like something misplaced. When he finally appeared, brushed and tamed into a ponytail, he looked fine in the most surface way possible. But the interaction around him felt hollow, formal, rote, lacking the spontaneous warmth most viewers expect when children are interacting with parents on camera. He repeated his hello a few times as if that was his script. The chat noticed the gaps. No cuddles, no chatter, a mechanical waving as if the child's energy was being managed rather than shared. People started asking whether he was getting help for speech delays. Drew said he'd had a phone appointment. Stephanie echoed that there was another the next day. But those quick reassurances didn't land as comfort. Instead, they read like performative answers to deflect the deeper, angrier questions. Who cares for these kids when the cameras are off? Who does the planning? Who notices the missed appointments? And then the legal tangle surfaced, which snapped the entire narrative into a new, messier shape. For years, Stephanie had referred to being a mom of 5, and she had publicly presented Drew as a father figure to some of those children. But when Drew casually said, "I have 3 daughters," in the middle of the live, the audience did a double take. The murmurs of confusion turned to fact-checking. The messy reality is that Stephanie is still legally married to an ex, Jeremiah. And until that divorce is finalized, the legal paternity of certain children remains unchanged. That means Drew, regardless of what the internet likes to call him, might not be the children's legal father. It was a technical, cold detail, but in a stream saturated with performative family images, it felt like a crucial missing thread. Was he intentionally blurring lines online? Was he misled? Did he care? Or was he complicit in a narrative that helped Stephanie maintain the image she wanted? There was also the slow but steady unraveling of other smaller truths that added up to something larger. Drew admitted something about not wanting a job because he does not like being told what to do. That line landed in a sympathetic way for some viewers, honesty awkwardly framed as personality. But for others, it raised practical questions. How is a household being managed if the primary adult resists structure and employment? The audience watched him shrug off expectations, while Stephanie, to their eyes, seemed to be aggressively curating reality. It started to feel like a relationship in which one person manufactures a story and the other provides the quieter truth, or at least fragments of it when audacious questions pierce the performance. The stream wasn't just an airing of contradictions. It also contained outright alarming moments. At one point, Drew, in an attempt to tidy up, grabbed a bag of trash and tossed it into the baby's pack-and-play. The comments exploded. That single action, ramming rubbish where a baby sleeps or plays, was visceral proof to many watchers that the kid's environment wasn't being respected. People typed frantically, accusing, pleading, offering to call authorities. The mood pivoted from voyeuristic curiosity to real concern, to urgent alarm. Viewers who had come for tea expressed concern about whether this was an instance of neglect. The live became a platform where strangers debated whether to intervene in a family's life, with half of the internet watching like it's reality TV and the other half debating the ethics of online intervention. Another line that split the audience was Drew's casual reference to seizures. He mentioned he'd had them and framed them as a reaction to sleep deprivation, like complaining of a rough night. For viewers, especially the ones familiar with health risks, that was unnerving. If a person is experiencing seizures, the natural question is, are they driving? Are they on medication? Are they safe with children around? Comments about driving DoorDash while experiencing seizures filled the chat. Some waved the "how is this legal" flag, and others asked if he was under a doctor's care. The lack of a thorough explanation only amplified the unease. People don't like it when essential safety details are glossed over. It makes a performance feel hollow and potentially hazardous. Then came the bomb that fans had been debating for weeks: vasectomy. In earlier corners of the internet, rumors swirled about whether Drew had once said he wanted a vasectomy. Stephanie had previously erupted about the claim, insisting he never said it and that people were inventing things to ruin them. Yet on Live, with an offhand line that felt more private than performance, Drew said he didn't want more children and had even thought about a vasectomy. The chat went loud because there was a wedge between public denials and the quiet truth that sat on stage. It suggested that there's a private version of Drew who will say what he thinks when the cameras aren't tightly controlled. It also raised questions about whose voice is the real one: the loud, controlling online persona, or the quieter person who makes choices he'd rather not explain. Throughout the live, there was an uncomfortable rhythm. Drew tries to be honest, or at least less polished, and Stephanie intervenes to smooth or correct. It felt like watching a relationship where one partner's truth is constantly overwritten. She would interrupt frequently, sometimes correcting numbers, redirecting answers, or simply hovering in frame, like a producer who wasn't satisfied. People in the comments labeled it puppet master energy, and it wasn't hard to see why. Drew's hesitance and occasional blanks made his statements more believable, but because he rarely pushed back, the audience couldn't tell if he was genuinely subdued or strategically silent. The live ended, as if the scene had read the room and decided to end on technical terms, with the phone dying. In a way, that was a perfect metaphor. A device that had carried so much manufactured presence simply cut off under the weight of the truth. Before the blackout, though, Drew said something that landed for many as the only real human moment in the entire performance. He mentioned his son's upcoming birthday and sounded genuinely warm, genuinely present. For a sliver of time, the internet saw a dad who remembered a child's milestone and cared enough to note it. It was a reminder that behind the spectacle are actual humans with actual feelings, even if those feelings get lost in the noise of performative drama. If you step back from the specifics, the live stream revealed the anatomy of an online relationship built for the audience, not for the people inside it. Stephanie's pattern of constructing a narrative that always positions her in some sort of moral high ground clashed over and over with Drew's less theatrical, more messy honesty. He's the sort of person who blurts that he's not into structure, who admits when he doesn't look things up, who gets embarrassed by the mechanics of adult life. She seems to prefer a scripted reality in which facts bend to fit the story, where inconvenient truths are either explained away or edited out. The result is content that looks like living, but often feels like acting. There are also practical, ugly implications. When a family repeatedly live streams moments that imply neglect or poor safety, like leaving kids in cars for comfort or tossing garbage into an infant's space, it does more than entertain. It exposes vulnerabilities. Viewers who have children or who work in child welfare often feel a compulsion to speak up, and watching the stream can morph into a moral test. Call or don't call. Say something or do nothing. Respect privacy or act. The live pushed viewers into that uncomfortable position, and unsurprisingly, many chose to speak up. in the comments, and beyond. Equally interesting is how the audience behaves during such streams. There's a kind of hybrid community that forms, half gossip forum, half emergency room. People who might otherwise just consume content suddenly become impromptu caregivers, investigators, and in some cases, armchair lawyers. They parse legalities about paternity and question the logistics of custody. They send Airbnb links and point out cheaper neighborhoods. They debate whether a vasectomy comment is a red flag or a private medical musing. They demand evidence for claims, and when something doesn't add up, they call it out with a ferocity that feels both helpful and invasive. The whole event also highlights a broader cultural phenomenon. We increasingly live in a world where private life is currency. This family trades pieces of intimacy for engagement. The internet buys access to the messy, intimate moments that used to be behind closed doors. The problem is that the exchange isn't always fair. When the intimacy includes signs of volatile control, potential safety concerns, or inconsistent storytelling, it becomes less a mutually consensual performance and more a spectacle, where the audience is left to decide which version of reality is true. For Drew, who sometimes speaks plainly, being on camera feels like a place where truth leaks out. For Stephanie, the camera seems to be a prop to keep a carefully shaped story alive. Both roles generate followers, reactions, and income, but they also create a feedback loop where the performance feeds itself, and the people inside it might be suffering in real ways. There is also the question of who benefits. If the couple is monetizing attention, then chaos has value. Viral moments convert into sponsorships, follows, and clout. But chaos also has a cost. Those costs are often borne by the people who can't opt out, the kids, the friends dragged into the narrative, and the bystanders who bear witness to what's likely a more complicated reality off camera. The live made that cost visible. You could see it in the way the kids were handled, in the tension-heavy choreography of who spoke and who didn't, and in the moments of human softness that felt almost accidental. In the broader social media ecosystem, moments like this also fuel an industry of commentary. Creators and viewers alike reframe, analyze, and monetize the meta-drama. The live becomes fodder for reaction videos, deep dives, and think pieces that pull apart every line, every glance, every pause. That, in turn, feeds the original accounts. More notoriety, more clicks, and often more excuses to repeat the pattern. It becomes cyclical. Create drama, get attention, create more drama. The problem is when the drama involves children or the health of family members. Then the cycle shifts from entertainment to ethically fraught spectacle. Watching the stream, you're struck by the sheer ordinariness of the details that become extraordinary because of the context. A motel room becomes a symbol. A child's pajamas at noon become evidence in an argument about care. A tossed trash bag becomes a viral image that people will use as proof of neglect. Anyone watching a few minutes of footage can assemble a case and point fingers. But the fuller, messier truth, how bills are actually paid, what legal steps are being taken or not taken, what emotional labor is happening behind closed doors, remains opaque. That's the danger of living life publicly. The stream edits itself in the viewer's mind, and people fill in the blanks with their worst suspicions. And yet, despite all the judgment and the accusations, there's a human kernel in this story. Drew's mention of his son's birthday, a momentary attempt at tidying, little flashes of warmth. They complicate any simple narrative of villain and victim. It is possible to be both negligent and loving in different measures. It's possible to be controlling and yet genuinely protective in certain ways. Human beings contain multitudes, and the internet often insists on packaging them into smaller boxes for neat consumption. That is perhaps the most tragic part of watching these live dramas unfold, the reduction of complex relationships to meme-ready sound bites. In the end, the live was more than a messy moment. It was a small live-action soap opera that forced strangers to reckon with the risks and responsibilities of broadcasting life. It reminded viewers that the people they watch are people first, with messy legal realities and human vulnerabilities. It left the audience with an uncomfortable mirror. Are we complicit in the spectacle? Do we demand entertainment at the cost of empathy? Do we step in when necessary or simply clap from the sidelines? The stream didn't answer those questions, but it did prod them into the light. And of course, as with any public unraveling, the last line belongs to the watchers. Who is pulling them down? Is Drew stuck in a narrative that isn't his? Or is Stephanie holding tight to an image that consumes everyone around her? Maybe the better question is not who drags them, but who will step up when the cameras are off to actually make things better for the children caught in the middle. Because the internet will continue to feast on moments like this. But real life, with its bills, courtrooms, and bedtime routines, will keep going long after the battery dies. Thanks for watching.